What's going on with capitalism? It's strange, right? Lots of change. We're going to explore that with Seth Levine, a good friend, a partner at Foundry, been in venture capital for a long time, been around the Techstars story for a long time. He's got a new book out called Capital Evolution. Super interesting topic. We're going to hear the latest on his thoughts from Seth himself. We're going to hear a little bit of an update on Foundry and what's happening across the Colorado startup community. That's coming up right now on the Give First podcast.
Hi, everyone. This is David Cohen, and I'm here with my amazing co-host,
Brad Feld.
Hey, Brad. And this is the Give First podcast. And in the startup world, Give First means simply trying to help anyone, especially entrepreneurs, without any expectation of getting anything back. So we'll be talking to mentors and founders about what Give First looks like in action and how it makes great entrepreneurship possible.
We polled everyone, and they said consistently that their favorite part of the show was the legal mumbo jumbo. So here it is. The following discussion is an expression of personal opinion and does not represent the opinion of Techstars or any company we discuss. Our conversations for informational purposes only, including any mention of securities or funds. This is not legal, business, investment, or tax advice and is not intended for use by any investor. Certain of Techstars funds own or may own in the future securities in some of the companies discussed in this podcast. Got it? Seth, great to have you on the Give First podcast. Thanks for joining us today.
David, thank you for having me.
Well, I thought it might be fun to help people understand your long history with Techstars as a starting point. I think we met around 2006, and the first Techstars program was in 2007. And you've been involved from the get-go as part of Foundry. So tell me what you remember about the early days of Techstars.
Yeah, well, I was actually thinking about something very specific, which is like, when did I first meet David Cohen, right? Because, we've become great friends. We've done so many things together. And
I thought you were going to say you rue the day or something.
I can't believe that. Everything changed after I met David. But it was in 2007. I actually kind of have this vision. We were, that first Techstars program would run. So, I'd heard from Brad. You had met Brad, and you guys decided to kick off this thing called Techstars. And I remember Brad saying, hey, there's this thing called Techstars. It's going to be really cool. Here's what it is. And sort of the program kicked off, and it was in that space that was like downstairs in some old like spa or club, like
the bunker. Yeah.
And I remember being in there, and sort of you walked over, and anyway, that's probably making it up, but that is my first memory of you, which is like, giving us a tour of the space, which included like, the empty hot tub thing that used to be in, what was the men's locker room or whatever. And that crazy.
Yeah, it's interesting because the first program, actually the 2007 program was held in a different space, which was a one-time thing, which was actually, it was a design firm that ended up getting bought by Crispin Porter, and it was it's where Sovereign is now.
Yeah, no, I know exactly. That's right. And of course, it's funny because I remember, I mentored a company in that first cohort, and of course, I remember meeting them there. I don't know why that's the memory I have of that.
The bunker is. I have of you. I think the bunker is just so memorable that people transpose their.
Yeah, I think it was 20 years ago, and my memory sucks. So I think it's really what it is. But
no, but the bunker with the lockers and the hot tub, it was an old gym, and it had the flooring that was that mat that you sweat on when you work out. And I think we stapled carpet on top of that mat.
Yeah,
that was how we did it back.
And then, just to be clear for people listening, it smelled too, right? Like you don't move into an old gym that had been used for however long in this like Class C building. I mean, it was not nice, but no. Now that you say, you're right. I do remember that other space because I remember meeting Ari and Tom, the company that I mentored, Filter Rocks, in that very first program. But it was such a great idea from the beginning, and we all knew it, right? And it was clear that it was going to be something. I don't know that at that moment, any of us thought it was going to be quite as big as it ultimately got in terms of its global reach, but maybe you did, right? Maybe you always had that thought.
No. There's always the sort of story that you tell 20 years later, but like every business I've ever started, right? I had no idea that it would be a big thing. It just seemed like a fun thing to do, right? And they grow from there because they can, and you have some ambition around it. But no, there was no huge no huge vision around it to have it become what it's become.
And it was and is fun, right? I think that's in part why so many people from the community, initially in Boulder and then obviously in Boston, Seattle, New York, et cetera, got excited about it is because it is fun, right? And we really, people enjoyed being a part of it. And there was a lot of energy around that. It was a fun time in Boulder too, as well, because it was a little bit of kind of I don't want to say changing of the guard, but some of the old venture funds that had been around were sort of clearly not going to be raising again. And you were doing stuff, and Andrew Hyde and obviously Brad, and eventually right after Techstars founded, we started Foundry as well. So like a lot of stuff was changing at that time in Boulder. It was pretty fun.
And speaking about funds that are changing, you're part of Foundry, and Foundry's been a huge part of the Techstars story, but also a huge part of the Colorado story and national story. As an investor, I know people listening might want to hear, what's the latest with Foundry? What's happening today?
Yeah, well, I think there's sort of two narratives around Foundry, and it's probably helpful to just be super clear about it. Like we are not going to raise another fund. I mean, when we started Foundry in 2007, so later that same year, we did so with the idea that we would work on Foundry, the four original partners work on Foundry for 20 years and then kind of be done, right? The joke at the time was last one out turns the lights off. We kind of flirted for a little while, and maybe in the last 5 or 6 years about, maybe that wouldn't be the case and we'd hand the firm off. But in 2022, we raised our last fund, and shortly after that, we decided as a group that would be it for Foundry. So that's kind of where we are. People sometimes describe that as like Foundry is shutting down or has shut down or something like that, and that's not the case, right? I mean, we're actually as we're speaking here in November of 2025, we still have new investments to make. We're still in our investment period. From that perspective, like nothing has changed. And like venture funds take forever to be done, right? I mean, we still have a couple companies left in our 2007 fund, so that's approaching 20 years now. And so we've got at least 10, 12, maybe even 15 more years of work to do.
Right.
On a thing that will be known as Foundry. But at the same time, it's time for us to kind of step aside and pass the baton a little bit. And just as we were saying that 2007 was a pivotal year for sort of the Boulder ecosystem and Colorado ecosystem with Techstars starting and Foundry starting and some other things that were going on. It's been a good run, and it's time for other people. I mean, Foundry takes up a lot of airspace in Colorado, and we felt like it was time to kind of move aside and let the next generation of folks take it over.
Yeah, and you and Foundry overall have had a huge impact on what that next generation is. You've been investing in funds. I've also invested in some funds here in Colorado that are doing great and growing and scaling. Some of them people come through the Techstars system, like Natty, right, at Matchstick, and other funds like Range that have emerged that are really interesting. And what's so cool to see is, that 20-year vision, right? 20 years later, there are all these other funds, and there are all this, there is all this activity, right, that wasn't there before. And y'all have played a huge role in instigating a lot of that. So,
yeah, I mean, our hope has been, as have you, David, right? I mean, like the Give First ethos sort of really transcends all of this work. There's, you mentioned Natty, but also Ari has, and David Mandel, who both have connections to Techstars, have their fund in Massive. And, there's a handful of other funds that are also around Colorado. Like that, Techstars and this Give First ethos kind of really laid the seeds for the next generation of VC in Colorado, which is important, right? I mean, we all have a stake in Colorado continuing to be prominent in the innovation ecosystem, nationally and globally. And, that part of what it takes, a lot of what it takes is, entrepreneurs and drive and connectedness and community, but it also takes some capital too. And so I'm really happy to see that tradition will continue on in Colorado as well.
Yep, and in like all good partners at Foundry, apparently the next career is author. You sort of following in the footsteps of others who've written books. Jason, Brad. I don't know who else I'm missing.
At the moment, I think that's it. But yeah, but Brad's written enough books for all of us, so I don't think I'm ever going to catch up to that. But
he has, and you wrote a book before, which is excellent. The new Builders, and now you have your new one, Capital Evolution. So would love to hear why did you get into writing? What sort of prompted that, and maybe talk a little bit about both of those books.
Yeah, I thought about. I mean, really, I mean, it's like so many things in my life, like Brad has modeled for me, right? So I've had the great fortune of having Brad Fell be my mentor, best friend, all sorts of my business partner, yeah. So at some point, like Brad's been putting out these books, and I think it was really startup communities that got me thinking about it because that really felt like a bunch of sort of shared ideas, for lack of a better way of saying it. And and obviously Brad put a lot of himself into that book as well. But I remember reading it and thinking, like, this is the kind of book that I would like to write. And it just got me thinking about, and maybe it's time to try to put some ideas down on a piece of paper. By the way, I had a couple fits and starts, right? I was going to do something called Startup Metrics. If you search online, you can even find like there's a cover for it and some stuff like that. I never ended up doing it because it kind of descended into this like technical, is like going to be an accounting like textbook or something like that. By the time I was done, it sounded really boring. But it did get me thinking about like, hey, I'd like to get some ideas out of my head and onto a piece of paper. And one of the things I didn't realize when I started this work of writing was I just like my brain is constantly thinking, and there's always it's a very messy place, my head, and it's very loud and crowded. And when I write, it gets quiet and calm. And I didn't realize that, right? And so when I started getting serious about writing, and I write with a partner, a friend of mine, Elizabeth McBride, we've written both of these books together. And when we started this writing project, and when I would like really sit down, I'd spend 2, 3, 4 hours just writing. Like my brain calmed down, and I actually really loved that about that experience. And so we wrote this book, The New Builders, and it was published in 2001, which is about how the people that are starting businesses writ large, not tech businesses specifically, but all of the businesses in the U.S. are becoming increasingly diverse. Women, people of color, Black women are the fastest growing group of entrepreneurs. And that was kind of new news, right? Certainly it was new news to me. It was new news to most of the people I shared that information with. And so we wrote it up as sort of partially storytelling, partially sort of describing what's going on. And it was a great experience. And Elizabeth and I got together, I don't know, after we were done marketing, and we'd sort of gotten over the hangover of having written and then marketed a book, which you can understand, of course, because you've done it a few times too. And we started thinking about, do we want to do something else? And there was sort of the logical next book that included some of the things that we've been talking about, The New Builders. But neither of us really wanted to write that book. And it was at a time when we started thinking about what's the future of capitalism look like? And what's the role of business in our economy, if you will, but not just the economics of it, but also the sort of social economy. And we started talking to some interesting people and sort of getting some ideas, and realized that there was we thought a really interesting story to tell. This was probably 3 years ago when we started researching the book and then eventually writing it. I think it's more relevant today than ever before, right? We stand at a moment where I think people are really questioning what the benefits of capitalism, right? So that's on the one hand, and sort of what that system should look like on the other. And the book ends up being a real defense of capitalism, but also describes maybe a slightly different path forward, right? Neoliberalism, which is the Milton Friedman shareholders are the only thing that matters version of capitalism, which he defined in both a book, which was in the late 60s, and then eventually in a New York Times article that is very famous and he's very well known for, that was published in 1970. And so that's kind of the capitalism that all of us have known for our entire lives, but it both wasn't always that way, and it doesn't have to be that way. And I think, again, we're sitting here at the end of November in 2025. There's been this flirtation now with socialism across the U.S. and some interest in that. And there's a lot of people who clearly are disenfranchised or disillusioned with capitalism. And I think the book serves as an interesting thought piece for maybe there's a different way, but that different way doesn't have to be socialism, right? I think this dichotomy of capitalism and socialism is a false choice. And so, we tell that through stories, through lots of interviews. We talk to people like Jamie Dimon from JP Morgan Chase, Dan Schulman, who's now the CEO of Verizon. He was the CEO of PayPal when we spoke to him. Lisa Greenhall, who was a pioneer in impact investing, and we did, let's say 100 or so interviews for this book. It's very, very well researched, and it's a really interesting topic. What should the future of capitalism look like? And that's fundamentally what we try to ask and ultimately answer in the book.
Amazing. Yeah. So Capital Evolution in the New American Economy, it comes out December 9th. So that's pretty soon as we're talking.
Yeah.
Thanks for the chance to sort of look at it ahead of time. Appreciate that. It's been awesome to dig into. And I first sort of came across this in my life, really started thinking about it. I have a grown son now, Andrew. He's, is a paramedic in the Minneapolis area. He's really down on sort of corporate America, right? At every time, I'm talking to him, he's like, yeah, it's what about the shareholders, right? It's all about the CEO and the executives, and these corporations are so evil. And I feel like he's representing a generation when he's speaking. He's just down on it, right? And it's like, does capitalism even work, right? And you hear, well, is capitalism just dead? Is it the end of capitalism, right? Like, you're just saying there's maybe a better way. It's not just socialism or just what's happening today. There's something in between.
And fundamentally, we're acknowledging his question, right? And the truth is that he is not alone. Nearly, and at this point, maybe more than, because the study I'm citing is a couple years old, but more than half or nearly half of people who are under 40 don't believe that capitalism works. Right now, Minneapolis is an interesting market to consider that in, because they had their flirtation with DSA, the Democratic Socialists of America, over the last handful of years. And they've since pulled back, right? And their November, I know a little bit about it just because I went to college in St. Paul, and so I follow sort of the local stuff in Minneapolis, St. Paul. And they just had in their November election, they kind of pulled back from that, right? So the Minneapolis City Council that had been like super majority DSA has now, most of those people lost their seats. So now it's more even with some people that have all Democrats from a political party perspective, but sort of much more kind of centrist views, if you will. And we saw the same thing, by the way, in San Francisco, right? They really tried to experiment with some stuff that was very, very kind of far to the left, if you will, and have since pulled back because they found that challenging. So I don't know what New York is going to experience, but I think the book, for people that are interested in this topic, regardless of what you think the answer is, I think the book will be an interesting think piece, and will force you to sharpen your thinking, no matter what it is, right? Which is my hope for the people that read it.
Yeah, love the notion of the false dichotomy. I think that is the conversation today, right? Like, if you're not on board with America and capitalism the way it works, you must be a socialist, right? Like, it's this sort of us and them that we're obviously getting very good as a country at developing that sort of attitude in general.
Absolutely.
So you mentioned New York. Any other, with Mamdani and what's going on there, right? Like, how does that relate to the book, or what are you seeing when you see that playing out?
Yeah, I mean, the thing that I would point out about Mamdani is that a surprising percentage of voters who voted for Mamdani are also Trump voters, right? And I think that speaks to sort of the underpinnings of populism, whether it's populism on the left or populism on the right. Obviously, their prescriptions sound often a little bit different, but I think it speaks to these broader trends in our economy that relate to people being left behind and feeling disempowered, right? And one of the things we argue for very strongly in the book is like creating more capitalists, right? We want more people to be invested in, I mean that both literally and figuratively, in the market economy. And when people aren't invested in the market economy, you get what happened in New York, right? Which is people saying, we got to try something else, and it needs to be radical, right? And I think to some extent that was also underpinning Trump. He governs differently than his rhetoric, but the populism that exists on the right is due to the same things, right? It's factories moving offshore, it's lack of job opportunities. And I think one of the challenges we have in the US is that we think about our economy and we measure our economy sort of in its total. And if you look at that, things are going pretty well, right? It's the old Jeff Bezos joke. If Jeff Bezos walks into a bar and there's 100 people in there, the average person's a billionaire. It tells you absolutely nothing about anyone in that bar, right? And we tend to do that in our economy. And so you look at the U.S. economy, which is by far the best performing economy, sort of, let's say, over the last 50 to 100 years, sort of in aggregate. But if you look more closely, middle class wages have gone up by 12% total in the last 50 years, right? Relative to, let's say CEO pay that's gone up by 900% or et cetera. And income inequality, or the concentration of wealth, has gotten startlingly high, right? I mean, it kind of mirrors, frankly, the late 20s, which we know how that ended. If you don't, you can read Andrew Ross Sorkin's book, 1929, which is excellent. I just finished it, that talks about it. So, but from my perspective, the solution isn't to necessarily take away, and I'm not talking about sort of tax policy specifically, but it's definitely not to sort of blame one group or another group. It's to create more opportunity for everyone, right? I mean, the way we get out of this is to allow people and enable people to create more of the American dream for themselves. And this, we call that economic dynamism. It's gone down a lot in the last 50 years, right? It used to be this sort of easy to remember, but it was, if you were born in the bottom 25th percentile of wealth, you had a 25% chance of dying in the top 25th percentile of wealth. Now that chance is 5%, right? So we don't have the same kind of mobility. And what we ultimately argue for in the book are some various ways that we can create that opportunity for more people, right? More Americans should have that opportunity. And we see this in Techstars, and we see it, of course, in entrepreneurship, where, it's not very pedigree driven, right? It's not, you can kind of come from anywhere, you can go to whatever school. That's not what we care about. We care about, your passion, your drive, your idea, your person. And I think we need to get back to more of that in our economy.
Yeah, so creating more capitalists, I mean, that doesn't mean necessarily that people have to go and start a business. It might mean they are investing in business, or they're participating in business, or, I know in our world, right, a lot of it is, you have to be wealthy to create wealth through startup investing, for example, right? Not everyone can do that. And this is something I actually talked to my son about, hey, look, I know you're not into the investing thing like Dad, right? But, he's out in the world helping people, right? In his paramedic role. But I gave him Jason Calacanis's book, Angel, right? Yeah. And I said, maybe you want to, with the Jobs Act, you can participate in more business. And actually recently ran into Jason in Tokyo and sat with him for a couple hours, and we were talking about the power of that. So I don't know if that's one of the ideas, but it feels like just being involved economically in the broader economy, giving people more ways to do that, could be powerful.
Yeah, we call that out really in three ways, right? One, actually, Trump ended up doing a version of, which is these baby bonds, money for every child born. There's a whole bunch of reasons why that makes sense. We actually talked about it in our last book too. But we talk a lot about something we take for granted in sort of tech entrepreneurship, which is this broad sharing of ownership that happens in most tech businesses. Most employees at least have some stock options. That was surprisingly rare, right? I mean, I guess I thought from my little bubble in the tech world that more companies did stuff like that. It's actually not as common as I would have thought. And we talk about some really interesting stories, including a guy at KKR who's really pioneering this sort of broad equity ownership across very mainstream, like manufacturing style businesses. And so we talk about ESOPs and EOPs and sort of different ways to accomplish that, and maybe how to make that a bit of a broader sort of cross section of employees. And then we also talk about kind of what you described to Andrew, which is like, look, the Jobs Act was a good step in the right direction to enabling people to invest. And I guess my personal view is that the government is often pretty sort of paternalistic, for lack of a better way of saying it. They sort of expect people to not be able to take care of themselves. And so they put all these rules around what you can and can't do, particularly around investing because of that, that were put in place in like the 30s, right? I mean, they're nearly 100 years old that don't really make sense for the current economy. And so I think loosening those reins would be helpful, right? And allow more people to feel like they can invest in things that excite them around them.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, at least putting, a little bit of savings or a little bit of money or a little bit of your investment portfolio into these things that could grow, and being a part of those stories is a really exciting opportunity. So hopefully they expand that as
Yeah.
well. And
Have a stake in the economy, right? I mean, I think that's what's missing is there are so many people now in the US that don't have any stake in the market economy.
awesome, Seth. Yeah, I can see you light up when you talk about this stuff.
I
So
know, I love it.
the book is Capital Evolution, A New American Economy, coming out December 9th, 2025. So excited to, hear everybody's feedback on that. I'm sure you are too. Thanks for all you've done for the, sort of startup world in general, for Techstars. You've done a lot in our network. And for Colorado. And I know you got a lot more in you. So it's awesome to see you still putting stuff out into the world, and appreciate you hanging out with me a little bit on the podcast.
Well, right back at you, David. Thank you for everything that you do. And thanks for having me on the podcast today. I appreciate it.
Thanks a lot for listening to the show today. We'd love to hear your feedback, ideas, or who you'd like to hear next on Give First. And please leave a rating and review, ideally a good one. And reach out anytime to podcasts@techstars.com, or on Twitter, I'm @David Cohen. See you next time. Don't forget, give first.